Hello. Please unmute yourself.
I'm sorry, everybody. Just bear with me. Hopefully only another minute or two. Okay, good evening, everybody. I apologize. My, for whatever reason, my camera just did not want to work tonight. So I had to get it working because obviously we can't do the class if my camera doesn't work. But it looks like we are now working across all platforms. So I apologize to keep you all waiting. I'm sure you were all just waiting with bated breath for this very exciting new series that we have starting here tonight. The series of True Religion, Righteous Converts. And tonight's session, we're going to kick it off with a stranger who sojourns among you, Conversion and Judaism 101. Now, in truth, the whole reason why we gave this class tonight, or came up with this class for tonight, is because I wanted to use the word sojourn. Sojourn is one of those great words that you only use when you're translating words from the Torah into English. But there's no other time, place, or use whatsoever for the word sojourn. And dare I say, nobody even really knows what it means. But one thing that we know is that it is always used in connection with converts and the Torah. And if tonight's class is in fact about converts, then hey, we get to use the word sojourn, and I just get a smile because we're using the word sojourn. So, but be it as it may, welcome to the new series. Just with all the technical difficulties we had to start with, I do want to make sure that everybody is seeing me okay now. Everybody's hearing me okay now. Please shake your head to let me know that you're hearing me, you're seeing me, you're feeling me. We're going to break out a little pinball wizard over here in a minute. Okay, great, awesome. Everyone can see me. Everyone can hear, see. So we are ready to rock and roll. Okay, so in this series, we are going to, like many of our other series, we're going to be delving into many personalities, many colorful personalities throughout Jewish history, and specifically personalities who have converted to Judaism, who were not born Jewish and therefore became Jewish. Now, we touched on some such personalities in our last series on Jewish queens, and that's really where we got the idea on having a whole series on converts, because there are really some fascinating people throughout Jewish history that have converted to Judaism. But we figured that an apropos place to start the discussion was right in the question as to, well, what exactly is a convert? I mean, we're planning a whole series here on the topic of converts to Judaism, but we should really start off with defining what it means to convert to Judaism. Does the Torah talk about conversion to Judaism? What does the Torah say about conversion to Judaism? Are there more than one type of converts to Judaism? And these are some of the topics we're going to discuss tonight. If you look in your chat box there on Zoom, or if you're watching this on Facebook Live or YouTube, wherever else it might be streaming to, there is a link to a Google Drive, to Google Doc, and that is our outline for our session. So you can follow along with what we will be discussing together in that outline. And as with our other sessions, we'll plow through about half of the session, and then we will pause for questions. So, with no further ado, let's get right started. Let's get started right away, or something like that. So I want to start by way of a story. And this story actually took place in my very family, and similar stories probably took place in other families that you may or may not have met along the way. But the story goes that there was a nice Jewish boy who was always being told, as he's coming of age, as he's a teenager, a preteen teenager, starts dating, that no matter what, he has to marry a Jew, and he cannot marry, okay, I'm going to use the pejorative. I don't want to, I don't want to offend anybody, but, for the sake of the story, I'm going to use the pejorative that I know my father used on me when I was growing up. But the father told the son, no matter what, you cannot marry a shiksa. You cannot marry a non-Jewish girl. So the boy grows up, becomes a teenager, and goes to college and starts dating. And, he starts dating some nice non-Jewish girls that he meets in college. But he tells his father, Dad, don't worry about it. It's just a date, and we all know that while not every date ends in a marriage, every marriage does start with a date. So the father kept telling his son, just, whatever you do, don't marry a shiksa. But the nice Jewish boy falls in love with a nice Jewish Gentile girl, and they end up getting engaged and getting married. And somewhere in the process, the nice Gentile girl becomes turned on to the boy's religion. She becomes interested in Judaism, and she starts studying Judaism, and she decides that she wants to go through a conversion. And as we'll talk about tonight, going through a conversion is not such an easy thing. And it requires that she's got to go to the mikvah, and they have to start keeping kosher and keeping Shabbos. And they got to commit to put the kids into Jewish day school. And for those of you who send your kids to Jewish day school, you know that at least like in my case, I could get a new Tesla every year with what I spend on Jewish day school tuition. And the son goes back to his father and says, Dad, I can't handle this. This wasn't the way we were brought up. We didn't grow up keeping kosher, keeping Shabbos. Mom didn't go to the mikvah. I'm having a really hard time with all this. To which the father responds, see, son, I told you you shouldn't marry a shiksa. Now, I say that as a joke, but as I said, it happened in my family. I have a step uncle that was basically his story, and many of us have this story or know this story. I have very close friends, congregants from when I was a congregational rabbi in Cincinnati, and this was their story. And this is a very, very common story. And we're going to kind of delve into sort of the nitty gritty and the meat and potatoes, if you will, of this story, and really come to an understanding, or try to come to an understanding of what it means to be a convert, what conversion means, what's involved with it, why does it sometimes end up being such a touchy subject and such a such a controversial subject in some circles. As we all know, Rabbi Landis is an equal opportunity offender, but I am going to do my best to stay away from offending anybody on this topic because it is a very emotional topic. It's often a very personal topic. If anybody in the room is personally convert, a child of convert, we all have friends who are converts to Judaism, it can become a very emotional topic because, you're talking to the core of who people are. So we are going to steer, with the exception of my introductory story, we're going to steer very clear personal stories or personal questions on the topic. If anyone does have any personal questions, feel free to reach out to me after the class. I'm always available 24/6 via my phone or 24/7 if you want to come sit in my backyard in the snow. But we're going to try and keep it more philosophical, halachic, and any personal questions that come up, please let's keep them in a private arena. So to understand exactly what it means to convert to Judaism, we first have to understand what it means to be a Jew. Now, we gave a whole series on this, 2 or 3 series ago. We gave the series, You Might Be a Heretic If, where we focus on Maimonides' 13 principles of the definition of Judaism. And we're going to give like a 60-second summary of that now. In short, a Jew is not a adjective to describe a religion, a person of a religion. That is not what we are. We are a nation. We are a nationality. The Jewish people are a people. That's why I always get deeply offended when I have to fill out different applications and they ask me for a nationality, they ask me for race, because I am not white and I am not non-Hispanic. By the way, I never figured that out. Why there's only 2 races in the world. There's Hispanic and non-Hispanic. Maybe someone can explain that to me one of these days. But be it as it may, I'm not non-Hispanic. I'm not white. I am Jewish. I am a B'nai Yisrael. I am a child of the nation of Israel. And that is at its core what Judaism, if you will, is. We are a nationality. We are a national people. We are a people in exile. We do not have our homeland in the way that we are supposed to have our homeland, but we are a people. The set of beliefs that we follow is often referred to as Judaism, or if you will, the religion we follow is Judaism. But at our core, we are a people. So based on the basic core beliefs of what it means to be a Jew, as we discussed in the class, You Might Be a Heretic If, it's a basic belief in God. It's a belief that at some point in history, he communicated to mankind what he expects from us, and that there's responsibility, there's reward and punishment associated with those commandments. And that's how Rav Saadia Gaon summarizes Maimonides' 13 principles into 3. But that's the basics of what it means to be a Jew. A Jew is a member of this nation that we are a part of, and our belief system is laid out for us in the Torah, and it's a connection to the Almighty, and he communicates to us how we can have a relationship with him. Okay, that's the quick 60-second or 120-second crash course version of You Might Be a Heretic series. You can go check it out on Torah Anytime. Check it out at rabbilandis.com. You Might Be a Heretic If. It was a lot of fun for those of you who've been with us since then. But that's what it means to be a Jew. Now, That's step number one in our process for tonight. Okay, step number two. What does it mean that this nation of Am Yisrael, the Jewish nation, the nation of Israel that we are a part of, what does it mean that we are the Am HaNivchar? That means the chosen nation, the chosen people, right? We all have heard this terminology, and none of us know what it means. But what does it mean that we are chosen? That we are the chosen people, right? I remember that when I was active, back in my BBYO days, I think it was in Milwaukee. One of the local BBYO chapters in Milwaukee called themselves the Frozen Chosen. Like, we all know about the concept of us being the chosen people. What does it mean that the Jewish people are chosen? So let's delve into that quickly. The very first man that ever walked the planet, or at least, let's not get into the science and creation. It's not our topic for tonight. So we'll say the very first civilized man, if you will, was Adam Harishon, was Adam. Now, when God in his infinite wisdom created the world, the way that the Jewish philosophers explain it to us is that there was no plan per se for a chosen nation. There was no plan per se that there would be the chosen and the not chosen. In other words, Adam was created. Adam was given the responsibility to have a relationship with the Almighty. He, on day one, messes up that relationship when he eats from the Eitz Hadas, the tree of knowledge, and is subsequently kicked out of the Garden of Eden. So Adam, so to speak, was given one commandment, one opportunity to connect, one mitzvah, and he messed it up, right? Getting himself banished from the Garden of Eden and throwing the world into the situation we are now in today. Now, the Garden of Eden, the whole discussion on that, I think we touched on the Heretic class also, but the Garden of Eden, suffice it to say, for us, is not that it's a parable per se, but it's a term for the idealistic situation for the world. In other words, the world as it's supposed to be, that is the Garden of Eden, and we are striving to bring the world back to the Garden of Eden. That's our goal as mankind. And that was Adam's job. Adam messed up. Adam gets kicked out of the garden. So God sees right away that Adam, his first creation, is not going to be his, so to speak, advocate of this idea of bringing godliness into the world, which is what he wanted him to do. So God starts searching through the descendants of Adam, trying to find somebody who will take on the responsibility of bringing God's presence and the knowledge of the Almighty into the world. And we go through one generation, two generations. We go through Cain, Hevel, Shes, the three children of Adam. And even though Shes was a monotheist, and so maybe Hevel, they're all probably monotheists at some level. We keep going down, and we have many great monotheists along the way. We have Methuselah, better known as Methuselah. We have Shem. We have Aver. We have Noah. We have many, many great monotheists who come subsequently after Adam. But for some reason, none of them are chosen. None of them get the job. Until we get to, of course, Avraham Avinu, our father Abraham. Now, if there's a whole list of these monotheist believers in God, we understand that even Shem and Abraham had an academy where they taught monotheism. Noah definitely believed in one God. He believed in the one monotheistic God. So why is it that none of these people are given the job? Right? Famous misconception out in the world. Noah wasn't Jewish, right? We think, or many people think, because he's mentioned our Torah, he had to have been Jewish. He was not Jewish. Abraham, 10 generations later, is the first proto-Jew. Yet, needless to say, Abraham gets chosen. He gets a job. Why? So the way the old poem says it, how odd of God to choose the Jews, but it wasn't so odd the Jews chose God. Now, what does that mean? What that means is, while there are many great monotheists that were on this planet before Abraham, Abraham is born in the Jewish year 1948. That's one of those great and unbelievable coincidences that are fun to throw around at a cocktail party and are absolutely meaningless, right? We always talk about it. Abraham's born in the Jewish year 1948, and the modern state of Israel is born in the secular secular year 1948, but it's just a coincidence. It means nothing. But it's great to throw around at a party. So Abraham's born almost 2,000 years into the creation of the world, after the first 2 millennium, and he becomes a monotheist at the age of 52, according to many opinions, and he starts teaching monotheism to the world for 20 years without God ever speaking to him. Finally, at the age of 70, that's the first prophecy that he receives, and then we have the rest of the story. So the Torah opens up when, so to speak, Abraham is just becoming a prophet. He's just receiving his prophecy. He's just receiving his task from the Almighty. But according to the Midrashim, he's been teaching this to the world for 20 years before the Almighty ever spoke to him. That in and of itself is why he got the job. Because even though Shem and Aver had an academy to monotheism, and even though Noah was willing to build an ark and cram on all the animals, and Methuselah taught it to be, right? Even though they had all these great monotheists before and all these potential chosen, Abraham was the first one who was willing to put it out there. Abraham was the first one who said, I'm going to not only believe in monotheism, but I'm going to teach it to the masses. I'm going to risk my life. Nimrod's going to throw me into a fiery furnace. But I'm going to teach the concept of monotheism to the world. When God sees that, God says, Avraham, you're my guy. And not only that, but we're closing off the auditions, right? We're not taking any more candidates. It's been 2,020 years at this point. I've been waiting for someone to do what you are already doing. You're my guy. The way that Derech Hashem, that the Ramosha Chaim Luzzatto explains this, is to say, up until this point in history, this was the time period of roots. Not to be confused with the TV documentary that came out, I think, in the 80s or 70s or whatever it was. But he says the time period of Shorashim. In other words, any of these people could have done what Abraham did, but only Abraham did it. So once that happens, Avram becomes the chosen, and only his descendants are chosen. But chosen for what? So then answer that. Chosen for the responsibility that he already put himself into. Chosen to bring the message of godliness to the world. Chosen to bring the ideas of monotheism to the world. And it'll be done with great risk. We see Avram himself. There's a concept of Maisa Avusim and Labanim, that the lives of our patriarchs and our matriarchs are harbingers for the later generations. And we see that Abraham went through everything that we would later go through. When Nimrod, who Nimrod could have been Stalin, Hitler, same thing. When Nimrod throws him to a fiery furnace for being a monotheism, that's happened to us time and time again. That because of our beliefs in monotheism and our willingness to teach monotheism to the world, that's what has left us constantly threatened by the nations of the world and constantly persecuted by the nations of the world. So the job started off as Adam's. Adam flopped. It takes 20 generations, 2,000 years. So Abraham steps up and says, I'll do it. He does it for 20 years without God ever speaking to him. God finally signs him up. He gives him the opportunity to sign up with the covenant between the parts, the Bris Bein and Basarim. And at that point, Abraham is the progenitor. The Jewish people have not been established yet, but he is the progenitor of the Am HaNivchar, of the chosen nation. Now that comes with great responsibility. Not only does it come with the job of bringing godliness down into the world, but the way that we have to bring godliness down into the world is through the Torah, is through the 613 commandments, the Tar Yag mitzvos, as we call them. That is the prescription. That is the playbill, if you will, or the play script, if you will, for how we are going to bring godliness into the world. So God says, okay, you're signing up, great. You're going to get 4 exiles. You're going to be thrown across the world. You're going to be persecuted. And you got to follow 613 commandments. You cool, Abraham? You still signing up? And Abraham says, sign me up. Right? And at that point, that begins the process of developing the Jewish people. And that's the end of the time period of roots. And Derech Hashem explains that everything else in the world at that point is branches of the tree. Abraham is the root that will feed monotheism to the world, and everything else is branches. So what does that mean for everybody else? Well, like I mentioned, the Torah doesn't talk about Abraham till the third parsha. We have two parshas that come before it, as if to say that we care about all nations of the world. And we extrapolate from those three portions that there are actually 7 categories of laws known to us as the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, the 7 Noahide laws, and those 7 laws are the law system for the rest of the world. So in other words, the Torah is not just for the Jews. The Torah is for everybody. The Torah is for, when God, so to speak, came down, gave Adam a job, he flopped out, and then Avram got a very specific job that wasn't forsaking the nations of the world. The nations of the world still had their opportunities, right? Keep the 7, go to heaven. That is how the nations of the world were given their 7 Noahide laws. And therefore, we, as the Derech Hashem explains, that the way the world was set up from the time of Avram on, Avraham's descendants get a special responsibility, very challenging responsibility, comes with it a lot of heartache, and a lot more to do. 613 commandments. Everyone else has 7 commandments. In other words, if they want to connect to the Almighty, if they want to find a place in the world to come, if they want to perfect their place in this world, they only have to do it through 7 commandments. Now, truth be told, just to be totally honest here, the 613 commandments, it is completely impossible for any Jew to observe all 613 commandments unless you are male, female, Kohen, Levi, Yisrael. You live inside the land of Israel and outside the land of Israel all at the same time. You're both married and divorced, and you make vows and annul those vows. And probably missing a few things also, right? In other words, the 613 commandments cover many different categories of things. In truth, the average Jew follows about 270. In other words, maybe 270 speak to the average non-Kohen, non-Levi Jew. So about a little more than a third, a little less than a half of the 613 commandments are really for every single one of us, roughly 270. Whereas the 7 Noahide laws are really 7 categories of laws, but break out into about 67 commandments. So it's really about a 4-to-1 ratio. We as Jews have 4 times as many commandments as the non-Jews to follow to connect to the Almighty. Now, one other very interesting distinction that the Jewish philosophical writings explain is that as we started the Heretic series with long ago over the summer, we started with that idea of Kol Yisrael yesh lem chelik b'olam haba, that every single Jewish person has a place in the world to come. So part of, if you will, the consolation prize of being on Team Abraham with a lot more responsibility, a lot more bloodshed, a lot more persecution, a lot more challenges, is that we start off with a place in the world to come. In other words, the Jew is, unlike the Christian concept of a person being born into sin, we say, no, a Jew is born with a place in the world to come. Now we spend our whole life trying to cultivate that place in the world to come. And based on our relationship with the Almighty and how we live, that will determine what that place in the world to come looks like. But we all start off with a place in the world to come. The Jewish philosophers say the opposite for the nations of the world. The nations of the world do not start off with a place in the world to come. Rather, they have to earn it. Through their following of the 7 Noahide code, the Noahide code, they earn their place in the world to come. So it's, again, a little bit of a different relationship. More responsibility comes with a few perks, a lot more challenges, but a few perks. Less responsibility can still, get your place in the world to come. In other words, back to the Garden of Eden, to the perfect world, but you're starting off at a point where you're at 0 and you got to build up from there. That is so those are the 2 of the key differences between the Jewish nation, Am Yisrael, and the nations of the world. Okay. Now that's our background and our backdrop to really get into the discussion of conversion, because as the Ramchal points out, and really many point out, is even though from the time of Abraham, the time of roots had ended and the time of branches had begun, and therefore you have Abraham's nation and you have everybody else. But God, with his, with his divine kindness, gave the opportunity for anyone to join Team Avraham at any point. In other words, Team Avram was never closed. It was closed by birth. The birthright was closed, so to speak, but the ability to join on to that birthright, to choose to be part of Team Abraham, that The door for that was always open. That's what we'll talk about when we, now that we're going to talk about conversion. But I do want to pause here just for see if there's any questions about what we've covered so far. Make sure everything is clear. Any questions about what we've said so far? Okay. So again, as either I'm being so clear or so confusing, and I never really know based on the looks on everyone's faces. But let's keep going. So, even though you're not born into Team Abraham, you can get onto Team Abraham. For those of us who will come from Jewish lineage. By the way, I'll throw out a little bit of a interesting statement here, a little bit of a complicated statement, but an interesting statement nonetheless. What determines if somebody is a Jew or not? Right? I'm sure everyone wants to pop up, unmute, text in. You'll say, if your mother's Jewish, right? If your mother's Jewish, you're Jewish, right? That's what everyone would say. Not exactly true. Why? Because what determines if you're a Kohen, Levi, or Yisrael? Well, that's determined by your father. What determines if you are a part of Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, right? Your tribal heritage, which came with it, your ancestral part of the land of Israel, and laws of inheritance, all these things. What does that go by? It goes by your father. So, which one does Judaism go by? Does it go by your mother, or does it go by your father? So, in truth, yes, it is in our lexicon, in our modern lexicon, it goes by the mother, because we have that. The only way to know where a child comes from is to know who the mother is. You can't always know who the father is. Again, now we have the DNA test. You can go see the Jerry Springer show if you want more information about that. But without DNA test, the only way to know who your father is through your mother. So therefore, the only one we trust to tell you what nation you belong to is through your mother. Now, the question is, what happens when there is no Jewish father there? So the tribal affiliation to that mother goes up a generation, goes to her father's generation. But really, our affiliation of a Jew is a patrilineal descent, but needs to have a matrilineal descent to activate it and actualize it. So it's not. So yes, of course, matrilineal descent. That's what Jewish law. But it's really the matrilineal and the patrilineal together. And the question is, if the biological father was not Jewish, well, where does that patrilineal line come from that we look at? And we go one generation up to the mother's father's lineage in that situation. So okay. So now, once somebody is born a Jew, and once somebody converts to Judaism, for the most part, you can't shirk it. There's no getting rid of it. So there's no someone waking up one day and saying, you know what? I decided I'd rather be an Episcopalian. I always like the word Episcopalian. It just rolls off the tongue. I don't know the first thing about it or what they believe in, but I like saying Episcopalian. So I want to be an Episcopalian. Sorry, born Jewish, there's nothing you can do. You might run away from Judaism. You might stop practicing Judaism. You might stop practicing the religion. You might deny when the Jewish Federation calls you for your annual gift for the campaign, which ends tomorrow. You might deny that you're Jewish and tell them never to call you again, but there is nothing you can do to technically remove that title as a Jew. Once you're born a Jew, always a Jew. And as we'll see as we go through this discussion of conversion, once you convert to Judaism, there ain't no turning it off afterwards. Okay, so this is our ground. Now, let's start. If you look at the outline, number 3 in the outline is let's get the terms right, because we're going to see it's a little bit confusing when we talk about in the Torah who our terms are. So, term number A that I have there is goy. Now, goy, as we all know, if we have a Jewish mother who spoke just a little bit of Yiddish, goy has become a little bit of a pejorative, similar to the word shiksa. Shiksa is really a pejorative because the term shiksa in Hebrew means insect, right? So the reason why nice old Yiddish mamas called non-Jewish Gentile women girls shiksas is because it really means it's something you don't touch. Right? And therefore, that's why they would call non-Jewish girls shiksas. Not nice at all. Goy really just means nation, but it's become also a little bit of a pejorative. Now, interestingly enough, it's not the Torah's terminology. It's more rabbinic terminology. As far as the Torah is concerned, the only one guy, the only one nation is the Jewish people. And the term for other nations of the world is Ummah. But at least colloquially, when we talk about Goyim, we are talking about the nations of the world. It's a colloquial term, not so much a Torah term, not even so much a rabbinic term, but more of a colloquial term. The more proper Torah term for non-Jews would be B'nai Noach. Now, what does that mean? That means that every single human being that is alive today descended from Noah, from Noach. Well, how do we know that? Quite simple, because the world was destroyed in a big flood. He and his family were saved. So therefore, the world was rebuilt with the descendants of Noah. And therefore, every single person in the world is a descendant of Noah. So the terminology we use in a Torah sense for the nations of the world, or for non-Jews, are B'nai Noach, the children of Noah. What are we? We're B'nai Yaakov. We're the children of Jacob, because the completion of the process that starts with Abraham ends with Jacob when we become a nation, and then is culminated when the Torah is received on Sinai. So we're the children of Jacob. The nations of the world are the children of Noah. That's the terminology for them. Okay, now, how does a ben Noach, and by the way, that's where we talk about the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, the 7 Noahide laws, right? The 7 laws that apply to the children of Noah, to everyone else in the world. How does somebody transition from being a ben Noach, or a bat Noach, or B'nai Noach, to being a B'nai Yaakov, to being part of the Jewish people? So in truth, there's at least 2 to 3 options. I'll say 2 to 3 options. One option is a concept that is definitely talked about in the Torah, but is also frowned upon the Torah. It's not encouraged to be used widely, but it's the concept of avdus. Avdus means indentured servant. So when a non-Jew becomes an indentured servant to a Jew, the Hebrew term is an eved for a male, a shifcha for a female, or a eved kanaini or shifcha kanainis, meaning a non-Jewish servant. In order for that person to become an indentured servant, they have to go through I don't even want to call it a partial conversion to Judaism. We'll call it a 95% conversion to Judaism. If they are male, they have to be circumcised. If they are male or female, they have to go to the mikvah, and they have to take on following the mitzvahs of the Torah. That is what we call an eved, a non-Jewish eved. And then down the road, if and when that eved or shivcha is freed, they, at that point, become not a Gentile again, not a B'nai Noach again, but they become a full-blown Jew at that point. And they can be counted for a minyan, and they get a bar mitzvah and a bat mitzvah, right? And they can buy Israel bonds, or they can do that if it's a non-Jew. But they are completely Jewish at that point. Okay, so that's one way that a ben Noach, a B'nai Noach, can become a Jew, is to first start off as an Eved, and then become freed, and then they are a full-blown Jew. The colloquial term in rabbinical literature and in Torah literature for a non-Jew is ger. Okay, you might have heard the term ger before. Ger literally and somewhat loosely translates as convert. Now, why do I say somewhat loosely? Because in truth, in the Torah, there are 2 different types of gerim. Now, ger is that word that was quoted ridiculously out of context in the past few years. Different Jewish social justice organizations have protested certain policies of the Trump administration vis-a-vis immigration, saying that it's anti-Jewish because there is a mitzvah in the Torah to love the stranger, and because we were strangers in Egypt, and therefore it's anti-Jewish to support any immigration policies of the Trump administration. Now, without getting into politics, as we all know, we never get into politics here on this show, that is a total intellectual dishonest use of the Torah, because it's taking something completely out of context. When the Torah talks about the mitzvah, the commandment of loving the ger, it is talking about 2 categories of people. Number 1 is what we call a ger toshav, and number 2 is what we call a ger tzedek. What is a ger toshav? Okay, the word ger would mean stranger or for lack of a better translation. And Toshav means dweller. So Ger Toshav would be the stranger dweller, not stranger, like noun stranger, not adjective stranger. And Ger Tzedek would be the stranger, the righteous stranger. Okay, let's get into what these terms are a little bit. The Ger Toshav is something that does not exist nowadays. It only exists when we have the land of Israel in a Torah sense, with the Sanhedrin and a Beis Hamikdash and a temple and the whole system. At that point, when Jews are in complete sovereignty of the land of Israel, what happens to non-Jews? So the answer is they are allowed to stay in the land of Israel as long as they follow the law of the land. Now, what's the law of the land when there is complete Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel? It's not the Knesset and their law system. It's not what it is. It's the Torah. And what does the Torah say that a non-Jew needs to follow? The 7 Noahide commandments. So what we call a Ger Toshav is quite simply a non-Jew who chooses to live in the land of Israel at a time when the Jewish people have sovereignty over the land of Israel, and agrees to do what the Torah expects of a non-Jew, which is to follow the Noahide code. This is Rambam's opinion. Rashi and other Rishonim take it a little bit further to say that they actually follow a little bit more than the Noahide code. In fact, according to some opinions, they follow all of the mitzvahs of the Torah, except they don't have to eat kosher meat. Why that one? Right? Okay, because you want to go to McDonald's and get a Big Mac without the cheese because it's saying that milk and meat would apply, but the non-kosher meat wouldn't apply. The basic idea is this: whatever perspective we have, is that a Ger Toshav is somebody who chooses to affiliate with the Jewish people enough to live in the land of Israel, enough to support the land of Israel, and enough to do what is required of him or her, but does not fully become part of the Jewish nation. So whether we go with Rambam's opinion that they're just agreeing to follow the 7 Noahide code, or the other Rishonim who say no, they follow all the Torah except for they can eat non-kosher meat. Be it as it may, they're not becoming Jewish. They are still non-Jewish. And when they leave the land of Israel, if they so choose, they can go back to being not Jewish. Again, they should follow the 7 Noahide laws, but nothing else will apply. That's what we call a Ger Toshav. So the mitzvah to love the Ger applies to him and to her. In other words, it applies to the non-Jew who chooses to sojourn, there's our great word, sojourn in the land of Israel when there's Jewish sovereignty, and respect what the Torah says applies to non-Jews and follows that law code for themselves. That's what we call Ger Toshav, and we have an obligation to love them and to treat them properly. And our final category is what we call a Ger Tzedek. A Ger Tzedek is our halachic term, and it's not really found in the Torah because Torah just says Ger and doesn't distinguish between the Ger Toshav and the Ger Tzedek. But the Ger Tzedek is that descendant of Noah, the Bnei Noach, that decides, I want to be on Team Avraham. It's not enough for me to be on Team Noach, to be on Team Noah. I want to be on Team Abraham. Sign me up for Team Abraham. The question is, what do they have to do to get onto Team Avraham? So let's, by way of parable, take a look at something together, if you will. Let's look at what it takes for a person to become a citizen of the United States. Now, for me, Baruch Hashem, I was not only born a Jew, but I was born an American Jew or Jewish American, however you want to say it, right? Both my parents are American. I actually, strangely, which is not, it's strange for many Jews my age, for sure Jews older than me, is that I only have one immigrant grandparent. 3 of my grandparents were born in this country, which is quite an anomaly for many Jews. So I'm born Jew. I'm born Jewish. I'm born American. Once I took my first breath in this world, I didn't have to worry about anything. And no matter what I do, I cannot shake off either one of those. Now, let's say I was born, I had the misfortune of being born in Canada. because we all know that when something goes wrong, we blame Canada. So let's just say I was born in Canada and I wanted to convert to Americanism. I mean, I wanted to become an American citizen. And let's say I happen to have a problem with illegal gambling or prostitution, or I might not pay my child support or alimony, or I might be an alcoholic and be accustomed to habitual drunkenness, and I might violate some American controlled substance laws here and there, and I might violate some crimes that intend to harm people. Maybe I did a little terrorism here and there. Maybe I persecuted someone because of race, religion, national origin, political opinion, or social groups. Most people do that on social media every day. Or maybe I have not satisfied the time period I have to live in this country. If I would be able to check off just one of those on a list, chances are I cannot become an American citizen. So Pinchas Landis, born an American, again, I'm not. This is not, I'm not a confession here. I could be an alcoholic. I could be a drug user. I can do all kinds of terrible things, and I will still be an American no matter what. Come election day, I can vote. I can sign up for the draft. I'm an American through and through and through, and you can't take it away from me. But my counterpart up in Toronto decides he wants to become an American, has the same problems I have with illegal gambling, drinking, and drugs. He's not going to be able to become a citizen. Well, that's not fair. You have Landis down in America is doing all these things, and he's an American. Why can't I keep doing all these things and become an American? The answer is because right now you're not an American. And if we would make you an American, then you're going to have to deal with these things a little bit. You can be arrested for these things. You can go to jail for these things. You're going to be held responsible for these things. Once you're doing these things up in Canada, not gesundheit, but okay, America's not going to bother you. But once you become an American and you do those things, then we got problems. So if a person is an alcoholic, is a drug user, a violent person, on so forth and so on down the line, and we go ahead and make them American citizen, are we really doing them any favors? Because yesterday they could be free in Toronto or whatever Canadian law lets them do, but today we got to throw them in jail and they can't live a free life and they got to pay fines and it's going to be a terrible situation for them, right? So did we do them any favors to make them an American? I think not. And through this parable of understanding citizenship in America, we can understand that why a muggle has a higher standard than the pureblood. Okay, my kids have gotten very into Harry Potter again. My oldest daughter at home is reading Harry Potter to the younger kids, so I apologize for the Harry Potter terminology. A muggle would be a convert to wizardry and witchcraft, and a pureblood is someone who is born into wizardry and witchcraft. As I always tell my kids, they're definitely half-bloods because their mother is a witch. Just kidding. But be it as it may, I think through the concept of understanding citizenship, we can understand a little bit about conversion. Because when a non-Jew wants to become a Jew, today, as a non-Jew, they have the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, the code of the seven Noahide code, the seven Noahide laws. And that's it. Keep the seven, go to heaven. It's a much easier life. Not persecuted, no pogroms for them. They don't have to get their Hanukkah menorah ready this week and buy a lulav and nesrog and Shabbos and tefillin and mikvah. And they don't have to worry about any of that, right? Any of that. But once we make them a Jew, then all of a sudden they have to worry about that. And we always have to ask the question, when we're talking about this topic of conversion, are we doing them any favors? So what is the process of going from becoming a muggle, right, a non-Jew, a ben Noach, a b'nai Noach, a bas Noach, to becoming part of Bnei Yaakov? So in truth, at one point in history, we all converted to Judaism. When was that? Well, if you're looking at the outline, but as I mentioned before, that Abraham was a proto-Jew. He was the beginning of the process of becoming the Jewish nation. It was a 400-year process, and it was culminated when and where? It was culminated on the 6th day of Sivan in the year 1312 before the Common Era, when the Jews stood at Mount Sinai. That's when the culmination of the process of the development of our nation took place, and we all converted to the religion of the Jewish people. So, therefore, when somebody wants to go from being a Bnei Noach to being a Bnei Yaakov, we simply replicate that process for them. Because at Mount Sinai, we all converted. And therefore, when someone wants to become Jewish, we put them through the Sinaitic experience. Now, what happened at Mount Sinai? Number one, we were all accepted into the club. Right? We came there, and God and Moshe together, as the heads of the team at that point, decide to accept the Jewish people as part of the nation. Nowadays, that is, well, let me go through the process. So we were accepted as part of the nation. In other words, God said to us, do you want to follow the Torah? We responded, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen. We'll follow the Torah and we'll learn about the Torah. We're willing to be a part of it. That is, and at that point, God accepted us as Jews. Beyond that, what was also part of that process? We accepted the philosophy and the commandments of the Torah. God said, do you want the Torah? Again, we said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we'll do it. Now, we don't know all the details yet, but at this point, we trust Moshe. We know we're going to get the details through Moshe. He's going to, in a few moments, he's going to speak the 10 categories to outline it all. And we're going to follow. We're going to do it all. We're going to follow the philosophies of it. We're going to follow the commandments of it. Before they got to Mount Sinai, really when they're still in Egypt, 49 days before, when they were still in Egypt, all the males had to be circumcised. And when they arrive at the mountain, before they receive the Torah, everybody has to go to the mikvahs that were built. And that essentially is our conversion process. We have to be accepted, like Hashem and Moshe accepted us, or a convert has to be accepted. What's that represented by nowadays? That's the Beis Din, the Jewish court. The Jewish court is the agent of the Almighty. They're the ones in charge of accepting on behalf of Hashem, on behalf of the Jewish people, accepting converts. And therefore, they have the burden of responsibility as well, because they're the ones who have to vouch for that everything was done properly. In other words, they have to make sure if the Ben Noach wanted to become a Ben Yaakov, that he was circumcised properly. Yes, they have to see it. They have to see it happen. They have to see whether it's a male or a female. They have to see them go into the mikvah. Yes, that's when the actual Beis Din takes place. It takes place actually in the mikvah. Just the convert is in the mikvah. The Beis Din is standing outside the mikvah, but in a way that they can see the person go under the water in the mikvah. While the person is standing in the water about to dunk, that's when they are, so to speak, they get their citizenship quiz, right? We know that citizens of this country have to pass a quiz. So they are asked certain questions there of basic Jewish law, certain light laws, certain more difficult laws. And they're asked, do you accept the whole entire Torah? And do you accept the 13 principles of Jewish faith? Do you accept a belief in this? And assuming they say yes, and the Beis Din sees them go underwater, they come out and they are at that point a full-blown Jew. So even though we use this terminology of Ger Tzedek, once they have completed the process, they are Jewish. Now, there are certain limitations here and there onto converts for different reasons. A lot of them are very technical and not reflective of anything of their personality, of who they are. As we're going to see in this series, once you convert to Judaism, you can become the highest of the heights. We're going to see the great-grandmother of Mashiach is a convert. We're going to see the leaders of the Jewish people, Shmaya Vatalion, were converts. We're going to talk about many great converts, because once somebody joins Team Avraham, they are on Team Avraham. And that is the process. Now, again, I said we're not going to get personal, and we're not going to get too political here, but I do want to at least address the issue that often comes up of, well, Rabbi, it seems like kind of simple because, hey, I'm oversimplifying it, but sometimes it ends up not being simple. And what ends up not being simple is the requirements of the Beis Din. In other words, a Beis Din is made up of 3 Jewish males above the age of bar mitzvah who are observant of the Torah, who are themselves observant of the Torah, so therefore they can be advocates of the Torah. That's the definition of a Beis Din. technically, if said Bezdin accepts a convert, that person is Jewish. Now, the questions that'll come up is, did that Bezdin do their proper due diligence or not? In other words, did they ask the right questions? Did the person really need to understand what was in the Torah, what it meant to be a Jew? When they said, yeah, I accept to be a Jew, did they really get it? And that's where we get into the educational process required by Batei Dinim before the conversion, because they want to make sure to prepare the converts properly for conversion so that they can be converted and be good standing Jews. Because again, before they go in the mikvah, they can go to McDonald's, get a Big Mac, and enjoy it with a fillet of fish, right? And there's no problems with that whatsoever. They have done nothing wrong whatsoever. When they come out of the mikvah and go back to the same McDonald's and eat the same Big Mac, they just violated like 6 violations of the Torah. They get malchus, and they have to bring sacrifices when the temple's built, and they have to do tshuva, and they have to repent, right? So we want to make sure the Bezdin is doing right by the converts. And that's why many Batei Dinim have a very high threshold of acceptance, because they want to make sure that this person is going to be a sincere Jew, because they don't want it on them, right? They don't want to do a disservice to this person. If I convert this person and tomorrow they throw it all away, I've done them a disservice, because yesterday they were fine, a good Gentile, a good Ben Noach. Now they're a self-hating Jew, right? It reminds me of the famous lines of Krusty the Clown, when in The Simpsons he found out that he didn't have a bar mitzvah and thought that because he didn't have a bar mitzvah that meant that he was in fact not Jewish. He said, all this time I thought I was a self-hating Jew. Now I realize I'm just an anti-Semite. Right? So, okay, if you don't have to have a bar mitzvah to be Jewish, that's a Simpsons joke. But that's one of the reasons why conversion can get very sticky. Now, the other thing that comes up and is talked about extensively in the Talmud is the idea of ulterior motives. If there are ulterior motives of the convert, the conversion becomes invalid, even if they go through the process. It can become subsequently invalid if ulterior motives are discovered. Now, for this reason, throughout world history, when the Jewish people, so to speak, are sitting on top of the world, we don't take converts to Judaism. In other words, when King Solomon reigned as the king of Israel and everything was in order, we had the king, we had unity in the country, we had the temple, we had world peace with the Jews, we had everything. At that point, conversions could not be accepted to Judaism. Why? Because it's easy to convert when Team Avraham is winning. But that's ulterior motives. It's bandwagon fan. You want to be on the winning team, right? You want to support the LA Lakers when LeBron James, betrays Cleveland and goes to Los Angeles, right? That's bandwagon. That's fair weather fans. Can't convert at that time. When it's difficult, then we can convert, right? And therefore, we always look for the ulterior motives. And that's why that one of the most ulterior motives that is often discussed is marriage, that once somebody is engaged to a Jew, it makes conversion very difficult, because that's one of the most ulterior motives we ever see, is that somebody doing the conversion just to make the Jewish potential spouse's parents happy. And in the end, what they end up with is a conversion that is very questionable. It's interesting. As I was preparing for this class and we were looking at different people to include, I for a moment considered including Ivanka Trump, but I didn't want to get that contemporary and that personal with anyone who's still alive today. But it was interesting that I read in one of the articles that the Kushner family did really make her life a living hell through the whole conversion process, because they wanted to make it clear that she wasn't just converting to Judaism to marry Jared. Now, I'm not giving a shtimpel on her conversion. I don't know anything about it. I don't know the rabbi. I don't know what was done. I don't know if she's a sincere Jew, not a sincere Jew. I'm not saying anything about that. But what I am saying is that at least it's recorded that the family made sure to make her life a living hell so that there would be no ulterior motives whatsoever. So that's one of the big question marks that pops up. If there are ulterior motives, and if we find ulterior motives, and at that point the conversion can become invalidated, invalidated subsequently, or we call them mafreya if they're discovered afterwards, and that's where things can get sticky. So when we talk about a lot of the politics, especially in the land of Israel, the question is not really who's a Jew. The question more is who's your Jewish court, and that's why when it comes to these things, and why I personally do not get involved in conversions. Even when I was like a congregational rabbi, I steered very clear of it because it's tricky business. I can tell you in my short rabbinical career of whatever I'm at now, 14 years, we've had some sad stories. We had one story in Cincinnati where a very nice young man, he was, I don't remember how old he was, but he was actually taller than me, a nice African-American man who went through the whole process as part of the community for over a year and did his conversion. And a week later, he shows up in the rabbi's office with his tefillin. He says, "Rabbi, I'm sorry, I can't do this." And he gives him the tefillin and walks out of the office. The only problem is he was already converted. Right? Had he done that a week before his conversion, it would be fine. But now he's going along every day being what we call a karkaf shalom manach tefillin. He's now in the violation of not wearing tefillin on a daily basis and probably a lot of other things. So we didn't do him a very good service. It was a disservice by converting. Again, we thought everyone thought he was sincere. This guy we thought was a superstar, but that's a sad story. I had another I don't know, funny, sad, interesting story when I was in Cincinnati, and that is that one of my responsibilities in the Beis Din in Cincinnati was that I had to do the intake for all potential converts. Now, like basically what that meant is one of the ways that we always look into for the ulterior motives and look into the sincerity is we really discourage conversion. And so my job was to discourage the potential converts, right? I had to chase them away. Sure, you meet the guy who with a baby face who's was the youngest guy on the Beis Din, and they give me that job. But we came up with a nice, simple way to do it, and that is there's a wonderful rabbi doctor out in California, Rabbi Dr. David Fox, and he created something called he's both a rabbi and a psychologist, and he created something called the Garus Readiness Assessment. In other words, the conversion readiness assessment that you give to potential converts, and he, based on psychology and all these things, gives you his feedback as to how ready they are or are not for conversion. So that was my job, basically, to administer the test. They'd have to pay for it. We'd send it off to Dr. Fox. He'd give it to us, and it was always spot on. He really, it was a very good assessment. I do have some training and some education in psychological testing, and I can say this was very, very, very well done. So one day there's a young lady and she comes to me, and there was an older rabbi in town who was like, very into the idea of conversion. Like I said, I really personally, not that I'm against it, but I just was never looking for it. And he brings this young lady to me and says, put her through the process. So fine, we give her the Garus readiness assessment, and the report comes back like, proceed with caution. A lot of red flags here. There's a very complicated young lady. Now we knew that. It was obvious. It was written on her shoulders. And my whole approach was to very much proceed with caution. So I don't know, maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months after she takes the Garus readiness assessment, she totally disappears. Totally disappears from the community, and no one hears from her. Now, she had gotten pretty involved, and she was doing a lot of babysitting and things within the community, but she disappears. Another 3 months or so pass, and one of the families that she'd been involved with sends her a card with her and her new husband, who was a black man, and she's wearing a tichel, but it's not a Jewish tichel; it's a Muslim tichel. And the card says on it, "Converted." I forget the Islamic word for converted, but converted such and such a date, married such and such a date. So I always say, I do such a good job of turning away potential converts that I turn them to go to Islam. Right? That's what Rabbi Landis does. But be it as it may, it is a very complicated case. We've had some very happy stories. Some wonderful stories, even some stories of people that I was not confident that they would make it, and they have some of the most beautiful Jewish families I've ever seen. So it's a complicated case, and that's why we have to understand that it is very personal, and we should never judge anybody for decisions in this area. We should never judge rabbis when they, there's always that fun conversation that we have to have sometimes where we say, you thought you were Jewish, you maybe aren't really Jewish, or maybe there's a question on your Judaism. And, and it becomes a very emotional topic, but we should know there's a very complicated topic. And I hope through this little session we had together, I was able to shed some light on the topic, and over the next few weeks, we'll delve into some of the amazing people in history who have made it, who've gone through the process and have had major contributions or given major contributions to the Jewish people. Okay, questions, comments, concerns. Let's see, I had some typed in questions here. Let me get them first. Is the prayer untie the bundle sins referring to the sins of the Eved? Dan, I'm not sure which prayer you're talking about there. Is that, you're talking about part of the Amida? Untie. So there's Slach Lanu. There's that we should be forgiven, and then there's I don't think any of the blessings of the Amida are talking about per se the convert. There is I will say one interesting thing. There is, we call the Amida the Shemona Esrei, which means 18. Because originally it had 18 blessings, but then there was a 19th blessing added, and that was at the time of the advent of Christianity, that we have one blessing called the blessing of the heretic, and it basically is a blessing asking for heretics to be done away with. Originally, it was asking for the early Christians to be done away with. So there is that blessing, the V'lo Malshinim. So it doesn't mention Christians directly now, it just mentions heretics, but originally that was talking about the early Christians. It was trying to make the distinction between the early Christians and the Jews. Off the top of my head, I again, maybe if you want to send me something directly, Dan, afterwards, but off the top of my head, I'm not recalling anything that speaks specifically to the Avadim in our prayers. So, yeah, she's a good witch. Naomi is a very good witch. Have you ever met any righteous converts? If so, have you noticed any character traits that they have in common? I mean, yes. Like I said, I don't want to paint the picture that they're all failures. God forbid. There's probably more successes than failures, but it is very complicated. There are many righteous converts in the world. Many who participate in Partners in Torah. Many here in Cleveland. And I can't identify any character traits except that they're all righteous and sincere about what they do. Now the sincere convert, like if you go back to my story at the beginning of the guy whose father told him not to marry the non-Jew, and she made the better Jew than he did, and is often the case. The convert often does make the better Jew than the pureblood Jew. And that is definitely often the case. Okay, Joanne. So was there a time when if a man converted, his wife basically was converted as well versus doing through a separate conversion? Does a mikveh lady act as a representative of the Beis Din? Okay, so two questions there. At least in rabbinical literatures, we have it dating back, 2,500 years in the Talmud, and really the Book of Ruth being our real, our biblical saga that we'll talk about next week that talks about conversion. It was always a package. In other words, if you had a couple that would come for conversion, it had to be a package. In other words, you could not have a wife wanting to convert to Judaism, the husband saying, you know what, I'm going to say a Gentile. I like my cheeseburgers, I like my foreskin where it is. I'm just let's keep it this way. Any traditional Beis Din would not accept them for conversion because, first of all, then you would run into the problem of intermarriage. Like basically, you're converting them to create an intermarriage, and you're running into it's a sticky, slippery situation there. So Batadim have always dealt with them really as a package. So I'm not sure that that's exactly answering your question, but they have to both be on board, and that's what rabbinical literature going back to Talmudic times always says. Does a mikveh lady act as a representative of the Beis Din? No, it has to be actual Beis Din that sees the women go in the mikveh. Now, that does not mean they are seen disrobed. Conversion mikvahs that do conversions, they have a couple different things. They either have like a special like a penalty box, if you will, that the Beis Din stays in, where they can essentially see her head go underwater and nothing else, and she stays shoulder length with the water. So if you imagine, most water, if your shoulders are underwater and you're not at the same levels of water looking, you're not going to see anything. That's one thing that's often done. Just the structure of the mikveh is done such that it's only really her head you're seeing. And then when they don't have that, they basically make a sheet with a hole in it. So if you're wondering where sheets with holes in it came from, it did not come from men and women marital relations. Nothing to do with that. That's completely made up. That's a canard. But maybe it came from conversions because a lot of mikvahs will have a waterproof sheet with a hole in it, and therefore she basically is when she goes underwater, that's floating on the surface, but when she comes up, then she's wearing the sheet, and that's how a lot of, at a minimum, what the mikvahs will do for respect for the women who are converting, because again, it can be very uncomfortable that the woman knows she has to go in the mikvah from a man, so we do make sure that she is, at least her privacy and her tznius is respected in that situation. Okay, any more questions, comments, concerns, good jokes? Anybody? Okay, so next week, I'm going to bring up our flyer for next week here. Give me one moment here. There it is that it? I think that's it. Watch numbers would tell me it's the wrong one, but here's the right one. So part 2 of our series will be the first convert to Judaism, Ruth, mother of the Messianic dynasty. The other first convert is often Yisro. We'll touch on him a little bit as well, but definitely Ruth is one of the first ones we have recorded in Tanakh. So next week we will delve into the story of Ruth as not only a convert to Judaism, but as the mother of the Messianic dynasty, the mother of everything that we are as Jews, and how that plays into our story as Jews. I'll look forward to discussing that with you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. It'll be Hanukkah. So I'll expect everybody to have a jelly donut with them, or at least some latkes, or at least, fry your salad before you eat it. And we'll look forward to celebrating Hanukkah as it's meant to be celebrated, with a little bit of Limud HaTorah, because it is the time period where the Greeks wanted to lahashkichem Torasecha, they wanted to stomp out our Torah. So one of the best practices that we can do on Hanukkah is to study Torah. It is very much a time period for studying Torah. So we will have our class on Hanukkah. We'll celebrate together through learning Torah together as we talk about the first convert to Judaism, Ruth, mother of the Messianic dynasty. If anybody would like to follow up with me, feel free to call me, text me if you have any, like I said, we were trying to keep away from any private issues. That is my phone number. You can text me, you can WhatsApp me, you can call me. I don't always answer the phone so well, but definitely much better on texting and WhatsApp. If you have any personal conversion things you'd like to discuss. And with no further ado, I'll look forward to seeing you next week. Everybody have a freilich and Hanukkah, happy Hanukkah, and I look forward to sharing it with you next week. Be well, my friends.
Thank you.
Yeah, good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.